On a swamp with no land, fresh water, or roads, can you build a city? If you say yes, then congratulations, you have built Venice. In 452 AD, the Western Roman Empire was on the verge of collapse, and the Huns were firstly attacking northern Italy, turning city after city into ruins. You and the survivors fled in panic to the coast. On the islands of the western lagoon of the Adriatic Sea, you made a history-changing decision to establish a new home on this swampy wasteland. No one expected that the most brilliant medieval European civilization miracle would rise here. When you, as one of the first settlers, set foot on the archipelago, the soft clay could hardly bear the weight of a human body, let alone build a city. Cleverly, you came up with the idea of cutting giant wooden piles from the Croatian forest and driving them about 5 meters deep into the ground until they touched a harder clay layer. The densely arranged piles interwalled like steel bars, compressing the surrounding soil to expel moisture and make it more solid. Once the piles were secured, the tops were cut off and planks were laid to distribute the load. Then the foundation was raised above the water level using Istrian stone with excellent waterproof performance. Your design was very clever because the piles were sealed and could not come into contact with air, so they would not rot. To this day, almost all the original piles remain in good condition, still supporting. After laying a solid foundation, you began constructing buildings. Initially, wood was used for most buildings, but after several fires, you switched to brick and stone. To reduce weight, you strictly limited all buildings to 3 stories. The walls were made of lime mortar instead of cement because lime mortar is more flexible and can bend with the slow movement of the ground. The interior walls were deliberately designed in a crisscross lattice structure, like a trellis for climbing plants, while the exterior walls were firmly anchored to the ground with iron bars. Even with large stone windows and ornate decorations, the entire building remained as stable as Mount Si. Using this method, you quickly established several surrounding islands in the same way. Initially, the islands could only be accessed by boat. As the city expanded, many shallow areas could even be crossed on horseback. However, as the population increased and commerce flourished, a more convenient way to reach Venice's financial center, the Rialto, was needed. So you decided to build a bridge. The first attempt was a simple floating bridge that connected the 2 largest parts of Venice and provided a quick route to the Rialto. This bridge was later upgraded to a wooden bridge, which eventually collapsed due to a fire. You decided to build a more robust stone bridge to replace it. Over 12,000 wooden piles were driven into the banks of the canal, and about 10,000 tons of stone were used to construct the main body of the bridge. This bridge still stands today as a major thoroughfare in the center of Venice. Subsequently, stone bridges sprang up like mushrooms after rain, transforming Venice into a compact city composed entirely of canals rather than roads. This gave Venice a unique advantage, as the canals allowed goods and people to flow quickly through every corner of the city, with transportation efficiency far surpassing that of land-based cities. By the 16th century, Venice had become the most powerful and wealthy city in Europe, with all trade passing through it. As the population exceeded 170,000, you also faced a tricky problem: a freshwater crisis. Despite being surrounded by water, the seawater was too salty to drink, and Venice could not utilize these water resources. Without natural springs or rivers to collect freshwater, Venice could only rely on ships to transport water from the mainland. However, faced with the enormous demand of 170,000 residents, you had to get creative once again. Due to the fact that the islands of Venice are built around squares, you plan to use these squares to collect rainwater. First, excavate a large area and line it with a thick layer of clay to prevent leakage. Then fill it with sand and stones. Finally, rail lighthouse to guide the water flow to every corner of the square. The rainwater will flow into the reservoir, slowly filtering through the sand and stones until it reaches the main feature in the center of the square. To maximize the catchment area, gutters were installed on nearby building roofs to direct rainwater to the squares and drains. Venice thus became a giant funnel, filling over 60 wells in the city. You again demonstrated amazing engineering wisdom, saving the city. Medieval Venice was plagued by garbage, with people once directly dumping excrement, urine, feces, and rotting food onto the streets. Your engineering wisdom began to shine again as you started constructing an underground tunnel network to collect waste from each building and flush it into the canals. When the tide level dropped, solid waste would settle at the bottom, and liquids would naturally flow into the canals. As the tide rose, it would flood the tunnels and carry away the solid waste. The twice-daily tidal movements replaced wastewater with fresh seawater, washing away all of Venice's waste. The extremely salty seawater also acted as a powerful disinfectant. With this system, the streets finally became clean and tidy. When people overlook Venice, they can't help but marvel at the buildings that have stood firm for millennia above the underwater forest, with the crisscrossing canals resembling the city's veins. Congratulations, you have created an eternal legend and an impossible place with wisdom and courage.